give a warm welcome to the hosts of The Bride of Alternate Ending.
Hello, ghouls, goblins, an omnibus of creatures from the night. Gathered in the dusky twilight of the darkened room of the space between the spaces, I am your co-ghost and master of ceremonies for this beatnik poetry slam, Brennan Klein. And with me, as always, is your other co-ghost, Tim Brayton. How are you doing today, Tim?
I mean, I'm feeling it. That was beautiful, man.
Thank you. Yeah, this is Bride of Alternate Ending. Have you been taken far out?
I'm so far out that I'm back here again.
Oh, what a fink you are. In case you missed the title of this episode, we're going back to the late 1950s today. We're playing the hits. The truly iconic filmmaking legend Roger Corman recently passed away, so we thought we would do a month honoring his output. We put up a
such
poll.
prodigious output it was.
My goodness. Truly. I mean, the movie we're going to talk about today was shot in 5 days.
Which makes it the leisurely production of that week in Roger Corman's life, but we'll get there.
Mm-hmm. And you know how many 5-day spans there are in a nonagenarian's life? He made a lot of movies. But anyway, we wanted to honor his life after his passing by doing some movies. We put up a poll on the Patreon, and our Patreon subscribers voted for us to cover 1959's A Bucket of Blood, which I think we must say is inextricably linked with 1960's The Little Shop of Horrors.
It is. It's
in many ways.
It is a sad thing almost, because Little Shop of Horrors has, I think, one of the great making of stories, which is basically Corman and his crew were shooting a movie, and Corman, being a very tight, efficient filmmaker who knew that, a day saved is a dollar saved, they ended up, I believe, 3 days ahead of schedule. And Corman said to himself, I have all of these sets I rented. I have all of this equipment I rented. I have a day to get a screenplay off the ground and then 2 days to shoot. That's enough time. And it was. Which is the miracle of this whole story. So that is how we get Little Shop of Horror. A Bucket of Blood was that movie. And I feel like that's kind of the thing that you can't talk about A Bucket of Blood without having the story be about that time that it was a breakneck 5-day pace that ended up being twice as long as the shoot that followed up on it. And that's not entirely fair, because it makes this movie the parenthesis in another movie's history. And I think this movie's better than that. But we'll probably swing around to talk about Little Shop multiple times during this podcast, I suspect.
Yeah, there's no way to not. But at least in what I am reading about A Bucket of Blood, that movie itself was using leftover sets from Diary of a High School Bride.
That is almost certainly that's how he be when you're Roger Corman.
Mm-hmm.
This is the man who showed the same roof burning in like 7 consecutive Poe movies.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I mean, so here's, well, I guess we should talk a little bit about Roger Corman before we fully dive into A Bucket of Blood, which is the thing that Roger Corman straddles this fascinating line between, commercial cinema and B cinema and art cinema and all of these things that he was doing, especially in the 50s and 60s. And he was just such a canny filmmaker who was interested in chasing trends and making money and making movies just out of boot polish and shoestring. And that doesn't always turn out the best movies, but it turns out great stories.
Mm-hmm.
And it also turned out a lot of stuff that was reflective of its time because it was so immediate and so just, we're wearing the clothes we got. We are ripping off like the exact trend this week, and it's a fascinating thing to be able to explore in a filmography.
It certainly is. And you can always feel in his films the real world is right off camera. Like even in something like Little Shop, which is basically being filmed in front of theatrical flats, like you can, as you say, there's not enough time to create a new reality. So our reality is just kind of like slopping in all around the edges. And you know what I also say, as you point out, when your goal is to make movies the fastest and the cheapest, and that was his goal. And let us not pretend he was some, secret genius driven by passions. He is amongst the most, I think he would not disapprove of the word. He's amongst the most craven film producers who have ever
Oh yeah.
existed. Uh of the, I want to say, 57 films that he directed, a pretty good number of them are actually like good. like pretty
Yes.
damn good. And that's remarkable given the way that he made them.
Yeah, and that's the thing because other filmmakers who have kind of taken up his steam, including Jim Wynorski, who did start in the Roger Corman camp, and let's say like the David Dakotas of the world, they mostly suck. They're movies made in the same milieu, I guess, with the same kind of focus and that same kind
Mm-hmm.
of energy, are not good. And Roger Corman's hit rate is so solid.
That's the thing. Like, I mean, I think there exist good Jim Wynorski films. There, of course, do not
There's at
exist.
least
There's at
one.
least one. There, of course, do not exist good David DeCoteau films. But some of his other proteges who managed to make one or two good films along the way, like Jonathan Demme and Francis Ford Coppola. Um,
Well, I think as Megalopolis proves, Francis Ford Coppola as a producer doesn't have the exact same instincts as Roger Corman, the
Can
producer.
you imagine how many movies Roger Corman could have made for one Megalopolis? It
Oh
would have
my
been like
god.
800.
Yeah, that is. I mean, I think if anything, you're underestimating.
Um, but that's the thing. Like we love these people for being scrappy, except for David DeCoteau, who's just awful. But uh, but none of them do. I mean, and again, Corman's hit rate probably isn't even 50%, but the fact that it's over like 5% is kind of astonishing.
Yeah, and the fact that, a movie that he made in 3 days, like The Little Shop of Horrors, can sufficiently capture the imagination of,
Oh, Little Shop is so great. I love it.
we again, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But, capture the imagination of Alan Menken and Howard
Yep.
Ashman, and they turned it into that glorious thing that we associate with it now, the
Yep.
musical and the movie musical. And the world is better for that. Um, but yes, we should talk about A Bucket of
Well, we should
Blood
talk about
a
Bucket of
little bit.
Blood. Because we can go on and on about Roger Corman, and people have done so. But I mean, we do have in front of us. I think I'm just gonna tip my hand. I do think this is one of his signature films in a way. And again, it's easy to lose sight of that because Little Shop of Horrors is just like hanging around this movie's neck like a monkey. But if Little Shop of Horrors did not exist, if his insane belief that he could get a movie from pre-production to in the can in 72 hours had not been true, I think we would still have this movie and it would still be a very quintessential Corman film to have.
I agree, and I'm trying to hold off on too much Little Shop talk right at the beginning, but I want to talk about that point, but I'm going to in like 5 or 10 minutes. Like, let's get through the plot of this movie first. But I agree, it does feel like a signature title. That's one that I mean, anyone who's interested in cult films or 1950s and 60s films knows the titles of quite a few Roger Corman movies, but I feel like this is the one that I would associate with him quicker than other movies that I like. Even like he did It Conquered the World. That was him, right?
That was indeed him.
Yes, like I think I find that movie very amusing, but Bucket of Blood feels more attached to him than something like that in my mind.
I would agree with that. I would even honestly say A Bucket of Blood feels more like at the tip of my tongue when I'm thinking Corman than do any of the Poe movies. And I'd say six of the eight Poe movies I like thoroughly enjoy. So that's a pretty good hit rate. And I wouldn't say this is better than all or even most of the Poe films, but it feels more ready to go. I don't know.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. So you watched it more recently than me, because I had to prep a little bit and watched it a couple days
And
ago.
I've also
Um,
seen it multiple times, and I believe this was your first viewing.
this was my first viewing. I was very excited. I hadn't quite gotten around to this one yet, but I was wondering if you wanted to lead the plot
I
synopsis.
mean, the beautiful thing is that it is not a hard movie to synopsize because it is
Mm-hmm.
A, so short.
Uh huh. Oh,
Because
beautiful.
because when you make movies this fast, they don't get to be 3 hours long. It's kind of astonishing that he was able to get it all the way up to 66,
Mm-hmm.
and it is a tight 66. You're in, you're done. You have no feeling that any part of the story was left untold. But so it's short. It's also Mystery of the Wax Museum. So I could just say, what if Mystery of the Wax Museum had beatniks in it? And that would be the
Mm.
plot synopsis. But if we wanna go into a bit more detail than that, um, so this is a film that mostly takes place uh around the Yellow Door Cafe or in the personal lives of the people who work there. And the Yellow Door Cafe is a beatnik cafe somewhere in a nondescript, maybe New York, maybe the West Coast. I don't think they really gave any real effort to pin it down. But this is a cafe that is also sort of a focal point for the art scene in whatever neighborhood this is. Uh, the owner of this cafe is someone who has sort of a good eye for talent, so he invites various poets and various visual artists to come vend their art, basically. And one of the people who sees this day in and day out is Walter Paisley, the busboy at the Yellow Door Cafe, who is played by Dick Miller, who is, if you know the name Roger Corman, you either do or certainly should know the name Dick Miller.
Mm-hmm.
He is a quintessential guy who just always is around in some capacity in front of the camera in these movies. And this is one of his very, very few films where he is the lead. I believe, if Wikipedia is to be trusted, this was the third of his three films as a lead actor, all three of them made in the late
Wow.
50s by Roger Corman. So
Yeah, that makes sense. And he's such a consummate character actor. Like you're seeing him in Gremlins. You're seeing him in he's in what, T2, one of the
one
Terminators.
of the Terminators, both of the Gremlins, he's just around. Like he's in all the stuff. Basically. I don't
Yeah.
even. I'm going to see if I can quickly grab what is his number of films in his filmography. I'm sure
Oh God.
it
Hundreds.
has three digits, and the first of those digits might very well be two. But I'm going to see if I can pull that number up real quick from
Mm.
IMDb.
And I believe the documentary about Dick Miller is appropriately titled "That Guy, Dick Miller."
So he has 185 acting credits to his name on
Mm.
IMDb, and that
Okay.
probably includes at least some false positives, but over 150 for sure.
Yeah,
Right.
that seems very comfortable.
So we have Walter, we have this busboy who dreams of being a great artist and gaining the respect of all the beatniks around him. Uh and the reality is that Walter's not terribly talented and he's not terribly smart, but he does have heart, right? He does have the passion.
Mm-hmm.
So one night he is at home, he's just brought a big thing of clay because he's going to try to do some sculpting. And what should happen but his landlady's cat, Frankie the cat, has managed, as cats do, to get himself in the wall. And so Walter is trying to carve the wall open to get Frankie out, but he's not really doing this in a very thoughtful way, so he inadvertently stabs Frankie to death. And he basically pulls Frankie out of the wall on the tip of a knife. Very gruesome.
Yeah.
And in a panic, trying to figure out how to keep this from being something that his landlady finds out about. He rather inevitably covers the cat with the knife still stuck in its body in clay. And with nothing else to do with this sculpture, he brings it to the cafe and presents it as his first work of art, which I believe he calls Dead Cat. And
Mm-hmm.
and both his boss, a man named Leonard, and Carla, another cafe employee that he obviously Walter has a huge crush on, they both respond very well to Dead Cat. And so Walter basically decides, hey, I can do great art. The only catch is that I need a dead body to put inside my statues. And it is at first very lucky for Walter that dead bodies seem to keep accidentally piling up around him. But when they stop accidentally piling up around him, well, he'll just have to go out and make some. And
Mm-hmm.
and and there you have a bucket of blood.
Yeah, which I'd say, despite its many merits, does not live up to the title, A Bucket of Blood.
No, that is probably the single biggest issue I do have with the film. It is not in any way a movie that deserves the title A Bucket of Blood. And I feel extremely serenely confident in suggesting that this is one of those, hey, let's make a movie called A Bucket of Blood. I think that's a movie title we could market. What's it about? I don't know. Let's go make it
Yep.
anyway. It's one of those. And God bless.
Yeah, and and again, in the Roger Corman tradition, um, you can name a movie anything, and people will pay to go see it, and then you put it out again and name it something else,
Yep.
and they'll
Yep.
see it again.
Yep.
I'm reading here that it was originally shot under the title The Living Dead, which is also not a good title for
Also,
this movie.
maybe worse.
Yeah. Because there are no buckets and very little blood in this movie, but The Living Dead promises an even more different
An even
experience
more
than what you
different
get here.
experience because the dead here are dead. They're not living, unless it is that they live on as Walter's art. But
Perhaps.
I think you could make the point that his big mound of clay is a bucket of mud. And so the title is in some way a pun that no one would ever get.
Sure. Let's call it that.
No,
Um,
titles are rare miss. Like, again, Little Shop of Horrors, great title that exactly pins down what that movie is. Bucket of Blood, great title that just you would not on 100 tries come up with the actual story it's about.
no, not at all. And since we brought up Little Shop again, I guess now is the time. This is perhaps not shocking, but Little Shop, the movie that they wrote in a day while making this movie, has the exact same structure as A
That's
Bucket
the
of Blood.
exact same story.
Yeah. Obviously, they added a man-eating plant, but it's a down on his luck guy who is working with a pretty girl, wants to impress her. The only way to do so is through work, and the only way to accomplish his work is by killing people.
Basically. And he starts out doing so inadvertently and then is like, I don't know, that seemed to work. So then he does so on purpose.
Yep. Um. So that is a thing, and also Little Shop of Horrors does have that added frisson of the kind of maybe not supernatural angle, but that more genre focused angle where it has the plant.
Yeah, I mean, A Bucket of Blood is, as I said, it's just Mystery of the Wax Museum. When you get right down to it, like a no talent artist is suddenly praised for the realism of his work that are basically just a thin layer of cake over a dead body. Uh, Space Venus Flytrap is just a better hook, or
It
at
is a
least a
better
more
hook.
original hook.
Yes, it's. I agree with both of those things, but here's what I've been wanting to say is that I don't really love Little Shop of Horrors, the 1961.
You're entitled
Um,
to your baffling and terrifyingly wrong opinion.
okay. Well, see, here's the thing. I think as much as that movie is a monkey around a bucket of blood's neck, I think the musical and the '86 movie are a monkey around that movie's neck. And because it is the exact same movie with the same story and the same characters, it is a much more damaging thing to the 1960 original. And A Bucket of Blood, I found, like I said, this was my first watch. I found it a lot fresher, a lot more fun,
That's
and
legitimate. That's obviously, yeah. No, I came to the Corman Little Shop before I came to the musical, so I have what sounds like the opposite relationship of those things than you do.
in in what way do you think the 1960 original is better somehow than the Ashman Menken
I don't
musical?
think it's better, but I think that it is purer of heart.
I think there's an argument to be made in a podcast where we are talking about that movie. So I can hear you. I hear what you're saying. But yes, my devotion to Little Shop of Horrors really knows no bounds. So the 1960 thing, because it comes from the Roger Corman tradition where they're not really trying. You know, they're just getting it out. It is a brisk, bustling, efficient movie, and the musical and the movie musical are movies where they are really putting in the work and making something incredible. So that's the difference, is that, you know, Roger Corman had that spark and it's like that raw
Mm-hmm.
thing. But I just don't find the 1960 Little Shop that interesting. Um, and I cannot have never and can never view it in a way that is separate from.
That is entirely fair. My last thing I will say on behalf of the 1960 Little Shop, because this is not a 1960 Little Shop podcast. There is in fact such a podcast on our website if you want to go listen to it. Not from Brennan and me, but from Rob and Carrie and me. Uh, I like how unreservedly Jewish the 1960 Little Shop is.
Yes, yes, I love that too. And again, if we were doing that, that would have been one of the first things I bring up. Um, it is it is such a specific
There is a
world.
woman who is obsessed with the people around her dying named City Shiva. That's a terrible
Yep.
good joke. Or a good
Yeah,
terrible
it's.
joke. I don't know which one.
I mean, there's almost no difference.
Fair enough, especially in that movie.
hmm Yeah, so maybe in that way the comedy is a little more forward in that movie. I think this movie is it's billed as a comedy, but it is very much just a kind of campy horror movie, I find,
It
than
is
like a funny movie.
it's definitely of the two films. Actually, there are three Roger Corman horror movie or horror comedies that were all written by Charles B. Griffith. There's these two that were made, you know, in a week, and then a year later, he came back to make I'm trying to remember the exact title. Creature from the Something Sea.
Oh, I don't know.
Creature from the let me just look it up.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
so they made three horror comedies, and I would be inclined to say A Bucket of Blood is both the least outwardly funny. Creature from the Haunted Sea. Okay, Creature from the Haunted Sea.
You
Uh,
got it.
A Bucket of Blood is the least like I'm a comedy. Here are the jokes. Please laugh. I also think it is the most intelligent of the
Yeah, it's
three.
the most intelligent. It is one of those things where it's not a laugh out loud, haha, funny movie, but it is a deeper
It's
satire
a
of the culture that it's depicting.
it's I think a fairly persuasive satire of the culture it's depicting. And I don't have a ton of sympathy towards the beatniks in general, but I feel like this is a very precise skewering of them, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of more subtle stuff going on other than the like bad poetry that the guy is spouting off at the cafe,
Mm-hmm.
that I was attempting to mimic at the beginning of this podcast. But there's stuff like that gets really dark. There's a thing where Walter Paisley is like, I need to make more pieces before they forget about me,
Mm-hmm.
and the kind of like fickle temporary nature of all of this, where it's like you're trending and then you're not, and it's just brutal. Like, and I think that's really underscored by the fact that there is a woman who was on vacation and completely missed his rise to prominence. So
Mm-hmm.
when she gets back, he's suddenly this huge art star. And she's the one person who's not in on it, and she rejects that.
Right, exactly. And that's the thing, compared to a lot of satires then, now, and always, it has enough that is generally true, or it's satire is in some ways general enough, even though it's really precisely focused on this one particular subculture. It is about sort of art culture. It is about the weird intersection of authenticity but also chasing trends and making people like you, and when you have a good thing going, just kind of like running into the ground. So it is a good satire of kind of the cravenness of the art world in general. And now that I've used that word twice, I think it is worth, I think, at least letting simmer in the brain, uh a filmmaker like Corman making a satire of people taking the cheap and fast way to make something that they are kind of able to pretend is art.
Yeah, just yeah. Let that sink
You
in.
know,
I think that's totally. This is his The Boy and the Heron, as far as like
I'll,
reflecting on his
it a little
contributions.
bit is. I mean, he's probably made others, but like it a little bit is. But there's something I particularly love, which is the guy who owns the cafe, Leonard, figures out quite quickly. I believe there is at this point only a dead cat on Walter's conscience. Uh,
Hmm.
Leonard figures out pretty quickly that Walter's thing is putting corpses in clay, and he at no point is actually perturbed enough to do anything about this because it
Hmm.
sells. And like there's multiple very good scenes where excuse me, Anthony Carbone, who plays Leonard, and is another that guy, although not as aggressive that guy as Dick Miller is. He has some very good scenes where he's like reacting while trying to manage his reaction, including the one where Leonard and Carla arrive to see the first dead human sculpture in Walter's apartment, and there's just this some very well staged reactions where we see both actors in the same shot, and Carla's responding with this kind of over the top, this is so real, man, this is art, this is what it's all about. And you can like see Tony Carbone basically just like gushing sweat as he's trying to not let Carla see that he knows what's going on.
Yeah. Oh, that is such a good moment. And there are moments here where the filmmaking does attempt to visually tell a story more than just we have these sets with white walls and we're just shooting a movie in 3 days. Like I think that's one of them. I mean we'll talk about this, but the prop making of the statues is one of them. Um, I think I do want to put a pin in that, so I'm sorry for bringing it up. But in terms of like what Roger Corman is doing, I think that shot's really good. I think the scene where he does stab the cat in the wall is just superb subjective filmmaking, of putting you in Walter Paisley's head. Like he's mashing at the clay, the cat's wailing in the wall. It's very overwhelming. I mean, this is a little obvious of a metaphor, but like he has a pot bubbling over on the stove, and as he's attempting to handle all this, he hits his head on the lamp, and it's swinging around, and it's just this very perfectly chaotic, putting him putting you in his mind space.
It's really good. And I mean, like this is such so much of what you just said is like a perfect exemplar of the Corman touch, because a there is that, as you say, pretty bluntly obvious, like the pot's boiling over, do you get it? Because when you're making a movie in 5 days, you know what you don't have time for? Cleverness. You're just like, I can
Subtlety.
do that, I know how to set up that shot. um
Yep.
and also, though, at the same time, you do have this banging the lamp moment. So now we've given this thing where we need to actually like attend to the continuity of lighting, and we need to figure out how we're going to showcase this, because this is a man who thought visually. Like, here's a person whose movies all reveal that even though he's giving himself and his crew about 60 seconds to set up a camera shot, he knows what the shot needs to be. He wants to give us a good time. And this is, to me, the difference between Corman and so many other no budget and low budget genre filmmakers.
Yeah, his imitators and
His
acolytes.
imitators, his acolytes, his competitors, like all of these people. he still wants the film to be as good as he can make it under the wildly constrained circumstances. And I think a lot of people are just like, was it in focus? Was it lit? Can you follow the story? And that is never good enough for Corman. He's always going to go make that extra thing. He's always going to, bang the lamp is actually a term from animation from Who Framed Roger Rabbit to describe making things harder on ourselves just so we can prove that we can do it because it'll look nice. And he's Corman's kind of doing that, right? Like, there's no reason you need to do the Psycho lamp swinging, and Psycho hasn't even done the Psycho lamp swing yet, 1959. There's no reason to do that other than because it's going to make a better movie, and you can. It's not going to tax your resources that much to keep up with the lamp.
Yeah, and I think that's why that same instinct is why Dick Miller is such a good lead for this movie
Mm-hmm.
and for Corman. I mean, I believe in our previous episode prior to this one when we talked about Sisters of Death, um, like Joe E. Tatawa, we talked about the way he's just like this perfectly efficient character actor who can do what you need and cause no issues, and Dick Miller is that in addition to kind of looking and sounding like Joe E. Tata in certain ways. Um, but Dick Miller is that. Plus, he has this like extra layer of I don't know if it's charm or talent or something, but like he really sells this role in addition to just being able to do scenes in a single take when he has to.
Exactly. And like, it's remarkable how well this movie works at the level of Walter as a sort of coherent, interesting character, and a lot of that is just coming from Dick Miller because there is this not groundbreaking arc. I mean, we've sort of already described it, so you sort of know where it is. But like, this is a character who starts out being kind of a sad lump that we feel sorry for, but we don't necessarily. He's below us. He's beneath us at the start of the movie. He's just kind of just like this again sad lump of a character. We root for him up until we don't, but we always sort of understand what's going on in his head. So it's this kind of complicated dance of like, how much sympathy are we going to have for him? How much will his actions seem like they're just kind of inevitably it's what seemed good at the time, and we'll kind of forgive him for that even though he's doing increasingly terrible things. And Miller is able to do all that while also making sure we see that this character is ultimately acting in very desperate and villainous ways, and while also making the character funny. And like, that's a lot to balance.
Yeah, it is a high wire act of a performance, and he pulls it off without breaking a sweat because he's Dick Miller. He knows what he's
He knows what
doing.
he's doing. He's again, you put Dick Miller in your movie. Well, at a certain point, you put Dick Miller in your movie because you want to have the accrued aura of 60 years of Corman films attached to him. But you put
Mm-hmm.
Dick Miller in your movie because you know that you don't really have to direct him. You're just like, okay, Dick, this is the role you're playing. Do it. Um, and I think it is notable. Corman did want him to play the lead in Little Shop of Horrors, and Miller did not think that the movie was going to come off. He thought that the 2 day shoot was not long enough, so he did not tie himself to that anchor. He does have a small role in that movie, but he's not the lead.
Yeah, and who knows if that was the right choice or not. I think I don't know, whatever. It's been a long time since I've seen the 60 Little Shop. But I would like to, while we're talking about the very nice things about this movie, I would like to take the pain out of the statues because the statues are fucking
The
awesome.
statues are not just very good; they're inexplicably great. Given that, as is true of the rest of this movie, there was not like a lot of time to make them, so they're not the prop that, like, again, if we're Coppola making Megalopolis, do we have better statues than this? We damn well better. But given the pressure of time, I'm amazed by how quickly they came out, and it's also the movie's kind of flagging that as well, because at one point, Carla is astonished that Walter has already been able to churn out a statue, and of course, in the text, it's because he just slaps clay onto dead bodies. But there's, I think, a little bit of a kind of winking. Yeah, we sure do make these really fast, don't we?
Mm-hmm. For sure. But yeah, it's also it. there's so much good about the statues. They look like what they're supposed to look like, which is not a guarantee in this kind
Uh-huh.
of movie.
Or in any kind of movie, frankly, but we'll get back to that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess uh yeah, okay, we will get back to that. But also they are a such an excellent way to deliver gore in a low budget
Hmm.
level without having to do effects on a human body or show blood. So it's getting around like censorship issues, but also budget issues, and still delivering very creepy kind of violent imagery.
So I think for me the best of the statues is the second one. He has taken what he has no idea what he's taken from Carla. He's just so excited that this woman he's got a crush on seems to be responding, and she gives him a little like
Hmm.
baggie, and he takes the baggie home, and then one of the patrons of the cafe follows him home. Turns out to be an undercover narcotics cop, and it turns out the baggie was full of horse. To use the
Yep.
cutting edge slang term, that there has to be like a minute and a half of screen time explaining what horse is. It's like, what is this filler, or did audiences not know in 1959? I don't know. It's a fun scene either way,
Uh-huh.
because Dick Miller, it's one of the most openly funny scenes in the movie, because Dick Miller is just so completely clueless about what heroin might possibly be. So
Oh yeah, it's almost an Abbott and Costello
it's
routine in that
it's
scene. He's like,
charming.
horse.
It's charming.
Hmm.
Um, but so he, in a panic, swings what must be the sharpest edged frying pan in the history of cuisine
Oh my goodness,
and
yeah.
splits open the cop's forehead. And then when we see the cop next, he's this sculpture with like a split going basically down to his mouth. And like you can only imagine how much the censors were not going to let you do that in 1959. It's actually a little bit amazing they could get this in one of the other sculptures as well. But so we have this really horrifying full body statue, quote unquote statue, of a man whose head has basically been like split open like a Cenobite. And
Yeah, it looks almost like a Guillermo del Toro monster
it
design.
does, right? And the fact that we're talking about it in these terms tells us how good the sculpture is. But so Carla and Leonard come in to see this, and Carla has like a whole thing about like, it's so great, I don't ever want to see it again, blah blah blah. She's
Yep.
having this response, and the thing that movies about art struggle with, and movies about art that have very large budgets behind them can struggle with this, is the art living up to what the characters are saying about it. And what I love about
Yes.
this sculpture especially, but it's true I think of all three of the human sculptures, the cat is iffy, um the things that the characters are saying about the artistic merit of these sculptures are borne out by what the sculpture looks like. Like we see the face, the split open face, and like I'm immediately having some of the same kind of thought processes about what is this as an art object telling to me that Carla then voices, and that's cool to me.
Yeah, that's really cool. And in addition to living up to the way that people react to it, which isn't limited to like material or physical art, because there's so many like poems that are
Mm-hmm.
supposed to be great in movies that just aren't, or stand-up specials like Che Diaz's stand-up comedy show in And Just Like That season 1, and everyone's laughing their heads off, and it's like, no, this is one of the worst things I've ever heard. But beyond that, like, there are so many pieces of art, especially in B movies, that don't even look like what they're supposed to look like, let alone living up to the
Mm-hmm.
reactions. Like, there are so many movies. I mean, I don't think this happened in that second MST3K movie we watched. What was the one with the lady in the house that was kind of like Rebecca? Do you remember what that was called?
Oh, the Screaming Skull.
Yes, yes, the Screaming Skull. I don't think this happened in that, but in a lot of movies like that, there's a portrait of the previous lady of the house, and it's like, oh, she looks like you, or it's like a reincarnated version of the main character, or there's a bust that looks like the main character, and almost never. There's so many times I've looked at the painting and been like, a painting, and then they're like, oh my god, it looks exactly like the main character, and no, it doesn't.
I actually think that does happen in the Screaming Skull. I'm trying to remember what exactly the painting looks like. It
Oh, there is a shitty painting
there
in that,
there's a
like an
pretty there's a
absurdly
pretty
shitty
shitty
painting.
painting, and it's like I think that one could be excused under, well, it's sort of impressionism, so it's going to look a little bit off, but
Yeah. No, I remember that because he was like, I know this painting looks bad, but she wanted it this way. Yeah. Okay. There
That's
was
right.
one in that.
That's
That's why
right.
I'm
Yeah.
thinking about that
Yeah.
movie. Um, that one is maybe not the best example because the painting is so bad. But like a lot of the times, it looks like a painting, but not of a painting that looks anything like whatever the woman is supposed to be.
I feel like there is a Corman Vincent Price movie where we see like Vincent Price in a painting and it's basically just a photograph of Vincent Price and like maybe they've like gobbed some paint on to hide the
Uh huh.
so like that's the way to do it. But yeah, no, like this art does the thing it needs to do. And I'm gonna go on a tangent if I may. Uh
Go for it.
Here at Madison in the Chazen Museum of Art, a free art museum on the campus of UW Madison. There are sculptures, and apparently they were a big deal in, I believe, the 90s or maybe it was the early 2000s when they were acquired. Uh, they are these large, like larger than life goat statues, and they're
Okay.
anatomically correct goats, with one exception, and the exception is that they have enormous human penises that are fully erect,
Oh.
and they are among the most viscerally unlikable works of art I have ever encountered, but also you have a response to them, and I'm pretty sure it's the response the sculptor wanted me to have. I don't know what she had in mind, but like I have a very visceral, deep loathing of these sculptures, but I'm also excited by how much I hate it. And that is the way I feel when I look at the prop they made for the guy with the split open face. So when
Ooh.
Carla describes it as I love this and I hope I never see it again, like that to me is that is how I responded. That's so correct, Carla. And that's you just don't get that experience watching movies about art very often.
No, that's beautiful. Um, and
And when
I mean, I won't.
when you are in Madison, Wisconsin, which you will be fairly soon, I'll take you to see the giant throbbing goat dicks.
Yeah, I was gonna say I won't say when, just
Hey, listeners, if
for
you want to
reasons,
see
but
Brennan,
yeah, but I am gonna be in Madison and get to hang out with Tim in a little bit, and I need to go see these. That sounds
we'll make it happen. We'll
incredible.
make it happen.
But anyway, A Bucket of Blood. So here's the thing: we both gave this movie 3.5 stars. Obviously, our opinions on Little Shop differ, so we have it on either end of that. But and not that I don't like Little Shop. Um, but I'm curious what is preventing you from pushing it
I
higher.
mean, it is still a movie that was made in 5 days for like $10,000. Like
Exactly. It's workmanlike for the
it is
most
the
part.
absolute best version of this movie under these shooting circumstances I can imagine. And that's also why I have Little Shop capped at 4. It's like, no, they did make this movie on sets where you can almost feel the set the wall falling over the second they yell cut. Like that's and
Yeah.
that part isn't as true of Bucket of Blood. I think it is true of Little Shop. Like there are places in that movie where it's like, are the grips like holding up the set from behind? Because it feels like the set like it feels like the walls are waving. But and I hate to be like a size queen and basically be like a good movie is a movie that has a big budget, but it is a medium that needs a certain amount of money in order to actually produce great things. And I feel like Corman does not have that amount of money to make this production. He is doing the absolute best he can with not enough.
Yeah, and rather than saying like a good movie needs a big budget, a good movie needs the budget that that can best accomplish creating the reality of what it's depicting.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, Little Shop can be like that. This one,
Would,
at least, yeah, you're right. It
would
does
it
feel more solid,
would
but
it have
it's still
would it have been nice if there was a third location? Is what I'm saying.
perhaps. I don't know that I missed it in this one necessarily. I mean, look, I just watched Cube again last night. Like I am used to a single
That's
location
fair.
movie. Um, but yeah, I don't know that I felt like I did, and especially we do go to a third location because he's kind of running around outside at this like lumber mill for a little bit, and that part is where I think the pacing kind of deflates instantly. So maybe I didn't need a third location.
Maybe that's the problem. Maybe they should have stuck to two.
Yeah. I will say there is so he kills this like lumber worker guy. Uh, there is there's a lot of very obvious editing around the saw meeting the face of this man, but it gets real close, and
Hmm.
that's still a very visceral scene because of that. It does feel intense.
It absolutely is. And in terms of the things that I do feel the movie could potentially have tightened up, could potentially have done better, um, it has a pair of uh, beatnik hangers on who are extremely obviously under the influence of just a whole cocktail of narcotics every time we see them. Surprisingly straightforwardly so for a movie made under the production code, although also the production code cares less about movies that cost, whatever Corman had in his pockets when he walked on
Yeah.
set. Um, I like them. I think the actors are having a good time playing them. I think they're the most mean-spirited parody of beatnik culture, if not necessarily the most like on point parody of beatnik culture, but I do think they get some good jokes in. But they are one joke. And even the
Mm-hmm.
other characters are like, wow, you guys are kind of tedious. Are you going to leave now? And I feel like that's a place that the movie it's having a little bit too much fun writing the same conversation for these guys using different words.
mm. And I do think that's a problem that's kind of endemic in the rest of the movie too, to a certain degree when it comes to the beatniks at the cafe.
And it's I mean like because we hear for sure two. Do we hear three poems in full?
I think just two,
I think it's just
but we
two.
hear repeated lines multiple times from
Yeah.
the first poem.
And there is a great little motif where Walter hears uh the kind of echoes of the poem written in his honor, but not recited from the poem. It's more like a sort of woman's choir, like reciting it's weird, it's cool. But the poetry falls for me in the window of you studied the thing you're satirizing. Good for you. You did a good job of exploring why it kind of is stupid and silly, which means we're hearing like a minute of kind of stupid and silly poetry. And this is
Uh-huh.
to me always the challenge of like bad on purpose. It's bad on purpose. So thumbs up and also but why?
Yeah, it still sucks to sit through. um but yeah, no, so that is rough. But yeah, I mean just ultimately this movie is a delight.
It is. It is
I'm
just so
I'm
much
happy
fun.
to have I'm sorry for the loss of Roger Corman, but I'm happy to have had a reason to watch
Yeah.
this
It
movie or to
is
like seek it out
it
specifically.
is I think at least the third time I've seen it. Holds up. And I would say if you haven't seen Creature from the Haunted World, it's worth checking out for sure. I think it has the strongest opening of the three Charles Griffith comedies. It is not overall as good as the other two, I wouldn't say, but I think it has a really great first reel.
Okay, yeah, I'll look into it. I mean, I think I'm approaching these comedy collaborations in the order that nearly everyone has since 1980, whatever,
Right.
which is Little Shop, Bucket of Blood, and then that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd be interested because I do like both of the aforementioned
And
ones.
and you know what is true about Creature from the Haunted World that will make it very easy to watch?
Okay,
It's like 65 minutes long.
I do love that. That's my
This
favorite
is this is one of my
runtime.
favorite things about this era of Corman. He's making a lot of movies that are under 80 minutes or even a lot under 80 minutes.
Ugh, I
Creature
do
Creature
love
from
that
the
so
Haunted Sea is
much.
75 minutes. So it is an indulgent,
Oh, okay.
luxurious 9 minutes longer than Bucket of Blood.
Oh, yeah, no, that is wonderful. Um, I think I'm tapped out on Bucket of Blood. Is there anything else you want to add that we haven't
I
covered?
mean, I feel like this is something that I could probably fill 2 hours of space with, but I think we've covered most of it. I do want to just tip our hats, or at least tip my hat. We spent a lot of time talking about how awesome Dick Miller is in this, and he's very awesome. There's actually, I think, a number of good enough, given what the movie is, performances. Some of them are fairly free of modulation, like Judy Bamber, who plays Alice. the woman that you mentioned who was on vacation during Walter's meteoric rise to fame and has this just kind of really snooty attitude. Uh, Not a complicated part. It's basically be a bitch, and she does.
Uh-huh.
But I enjoy it. Like it's a good version of that, like sort of one prompt performance. I do like the two stoner beatniks. I think they're having a good time. And as I said, I really, really love the scene where the two actors are responding to the art. And in general, and Tony Carbone and also Barbara Morris plays Carla, uh, doing what the movie needs for them to do. And for Barbara Morris, it's basically like keep being amazed at how powerful his art is, and she's doing it. And does the movie work without these performances making us believe in the reality of it? Probably not. And so it's good that they're there. And I think this is also something that Corman uh, is good at. He gets the right performances from people, not the best performances from people, but he gets the ones that the movie needs.
Yeah. And there's really no one else like him at the level that he was able to put things out
Oh,
at
certainly not.
most of the
At the
time.
level he's working at, no one's even close to as talented as he is. And I mean, I think that's attested to if you look at the just murderer's row of people who came from his like stew pot of low budget filmmaking, both in terms of directors and in terms of actors. I mean,
Yeah, you
no
got
one is more prominent than Dick Miller in this film, but his very next movie has a very juicy role for a very young Jack Nicholson.
yeah, and we already talked about Demi and Coppola, and of course we have oh boy, the name just James Cameron started in the
Mm-hmm.
Corman camp. Um, so yeah, there's so much of what 1970s cinema became that wouldn't exist without Roger Corman.
Exactly. And yeah, so just to crib from the Wikipedia article, uh, he mentored and gave a start to many young film directors such as Francis Ford Coppola, Ron Howard, Martin Scorsese, Jonathan Demme, Peter Bogdanovich, Joe Dante, John Sayles, and James Cameron. He also helped to launch the careers of actors Peter Fonda, Jack Nicholson, Dennis Hopper, Bruce Stern, Diane Ladd, and William Shatner. William Shatner
That's
feels
a
like
pretty
one
good
of these is
roster.
not like the others on that list, but yeah,
Well, I mean, so does Ron Howard in the director
well, that's
list.
fair. Also, he didn't give Ron Howard a star. Ron Howard was Opie, but he did produce Ron Howard's first film, so that's true.
Yeah, well, and that gives you a directorial calling card, which is
That's
important
true.
when you want to transition.
And yeah, and like,
Um,
did he produce by far Martin Scorsese's worst film? Sure, but also he recognized that he wanted to be in the Scorsese business, so good for him.
yeah, you know that is the not mystery, but like the contradiction of Roger Corman, the enigma of him is that like he is one of the most interesting and talented filmmakers who's made so much dreck.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just throw on any Roger Corman movie and expect to be having a great
No.
time. Um,
And,
but just yeah.
and I was gonna say, well, that feels like a great segue to talk about our next episode
Oh boy, yeah, we're
because
gonna find
we're
out.
we're I haven't seen it. You haven't seen it.
Me neither.
I'm putting my marker down on we're not going to be as enthusiastic as we are right now when we watch our next Corman joint.
I would assume so. Look, the next movie that we're watching for Roger Corman month is the final film that he directed.
And
It's from
and by no means
1990.
the final time he received a credit because he was still producing. He was still producing. Like he has
Oh
movies.
yeah,
I don't think he has any movies in the pipeline, but he was producing movies from like 2 years ago.
yeah, like for especially for the Sci-Fi Channel. But also, even though runtime bloat is a runtime inflation, maybe is a real thing. In 1990, it's still an 82-minute movie we're dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
His final directorial feature, Frankenstein Unbound. Got a bit of John Hurt, Raul Julia, Bridget Fonda, Jason Patrick. This is gonna be
It's a cast of
something.
thousands, or at least a cast of four.
Yeah. We've got someone named Nick Brimble who's also here.
That's a good
Good
name.
for him.
That's a good name.
That is a great name. But yeah, so I'm curious what the hell it is. I when I was looking at the description, it's like kind of apocalyptic slash time travel slash. It's gonna be
I will
Yeah, you
go ahead.
hmm? You cannot judge a Roger Corman movie by its synopsis or its poster or its title. So we'll find out
But
what we get.
by none of those, although I want to say this, and we might even bring it up again on the episode itself, but I just realized something. The title Frankenstein Unbound has been kind of like kicking me in the back of the neck ever since I read it when I was going over a list of Corman films after he passed. And I just realized it's because Frankenstein, the novel by Mary Shelley, has the subtitle. It's Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus is its title, and
Hmm.
Prometheus Unbound is also a literary text. And I just sort of put two and two together that that's where you get the title of Frankenstein Unbound, and and that's kind of high-minded in
That
its
is.
it's
It's
sort of like low effort B minus English student way.
Yeah. So, we'll find out what that's going to be. We're going to slip a cool 31 years into the future from A Bucket of Blood and see where that leaves us. But yes, until then, you can find more episodes of this show, more reviews, and everything else at alternateending.com. You can find our socials on our show notes, and I don't know. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye.
By
She ate me.